Alright guys, let's get this started right here and start off with our first ever Star Wars Sunday. Let me get the little Star Wars tune in the background going here. There we go. Welcome to the Falcon. We're just going to sit here. We're going to chat. You guys feel free to interact. As you can see on this side of me, I'm going to have the chat live. So if you say something, it's going to just pop right in here. Yeah, man, I've been working hard on this. So got some cool interactive buttons down there for you just to play some cool sounds. But we are
I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father.
I want to be like Luke, man. So this is going to be super interactive with chat.
Will be with you.
I'm hoping he's already having fun with those buttons. I'm hoping we can all just sit together like we're having a beer or a cup of coffee and just talk some Star Wars together. So as we sit here tonight, we are going to talk about a few things. We're going to watch the Clone Wars trailer that we saw that was released from San Diego Comic-Con. Talk a little bit about that. We're going to go over some theories I have of where the series might be going, where it might be heading. We're also going to talk about Ashoka and her white lightsabers, and a lot of people don't know how she got those. We're also going to talk some Darth Vader and a little bit of Darth Vader history, and all of that's going to encompass a lot of Star Wars.
Altering the deal.
I'm altering the deal. All of that is going to include a lot of Star Wars lore, especially lightsaber lore. So we're going to go over some history and things like that. So buckle up. This is going to be a lot of nerdy talk.
Good
Push
job.
all the buttons. Good job. Push them all. That's what they're there for. So before we get this kicked off, let's go ahead and if you haven't seen it and you didn't know, at San Diego Comic-Con, they announced that they are going to revive the animated Clone Wars series that we had. That you can watch still today on Netflix. It's a great series. It gives a ton of backstory of Anakin and Obi-Wan and gives us a better idea of kind of who Anakin is. And if you watch episode 3 without watching the Clone Wars, you're kind of like, whoa, man, Anakin really made a big jump to the dark side right there. But if you watch the Clone Wars, you kind of see how he kind of made that jump and how it was a progressive jump to the dark side. So before we get too far, let's go ahead and watch the Clone Wars trailer together here, and we can chat about it as it goes. And the Clone Wars is probably one of my favorite ever. Love the clones, love Rex. We saw him in Rebels.
The name's Rex.
So let's just watch this.
You'll call me Captain or Sir. War does not come with a guarantee. No soldier gets the promise of safety.
My designation is Trooper 27-5555, sir.
We call him Fives. I'm Heavy.
This is Echo.
I'm Commander Cody, your new boss.
Sir, yes, sir!
I love this. I'm just gonna say
Looks
it one
like
more
we
time.
got ourselves a
Love
batch
it.
of shinies, Commander. Look around. We're one and the same. Same heart, same blood. Your training is in your blood. And my blood's
For those of you
pouring
that don't
for
know,
a
you see all
fight.
the different helmets of the different types of clones and clone troopers they have.
This can't be good. We need to pull back. Get on the follow us. If we can draw them out, we can see them. If we can see them, we can hit them.
Dang. So in looking at this again, I was not paying attention to the planet they were on, but it looks like one they had been on before. I'd have to look at it again. I'm not too sure. I didn't catch where it was. And there's Rex just to the right of Anakin there, who's we saw in Rebels, who helped out Ashoka, Ezra, Kanan, Hera, all of them. This is the important
All right,
part
Rex.
we're going to talk
What's
about.
so important that you brought us all the way back here?
Whoa. It's Ahsoka
Hello, Master.
with a
It's been a
Mandalorian.
while.
Wow. Okay. So let's just get to chatting about this. So the Clone Wars are coming back. You wonder what type of time jump they will have. Yeah, that's something I'm kind of worried, like not worried, but thinking about as well. I think it's probably going to pick up somewhere right before Yoda goes to the Wills, or right in that area in time. For those of you that don't know and haven't watched Clone Wars, that's when Yoda goes and starts to learn how to become a Force ghost, like Qui-Gon Jinn. And he goes and meets these mysterious Force creatures called the Wills, who are like Force people, I guess you could say, or represent certain aspects of the Force. So what's really interesting there at the end where we saw Ahsoka again is that we know there's a book about her and kind of what she did. Now, I haven't read that book yet, so I don't have too much insight. I've got maybe a quarter of the way through that book. So I don't have too much insight on all what went down in that book. But we know that she left the Jedi Order in Clone Wars, and it really deeply wounded Anakin, because that was his Padawan, and he kind of felt like a failure when she left, because she was basically accused of committing a crime and placing a bomb in the Jedi Temple. She didn't do it. It was actually a different Jedi that had did it, that was kind of starting to fall out of the ways with the Force. So with that, Ahsoka walks away. Anakin feels kind of wounded, and then now you get this clip of seeing Ahsoka, and she's still kind of like showing him respect and says, "Hello, Master." Like, she doesn't have to. She's not part of the Jedi Order anymore. She doesn't have to follow those rules and regulations. And you know that she doesn't consider herself a Jedi, at least later on, because in Rebels, when she is fighting Darth Vader on Malachor, she says, "Well, I will avenge them." And she says, and Vader says, "That's not the way of the Jedi." And she says, "I'm no Jedi." So we're going to get into a little bit of talk about Ahsoka, because I really do think the Clone Wars are going to revolve around telling a little bit more story of Anakin and Ahsoka. I mean, we saw in Rebels when they started to fight, Vader didn't want to fight her. He was like, "No, the Emperor will show you mercy if you just bow to us," basically. And she's like, "No." But what I'm really interested in is if they're going to really, really hone in and focus on her and Anakin, which I think they're kind of going to. I think they're going to show maybe some stuff with Maul, because if you remember with Death Watch, Maul was in charge of them with the black saber. So that's going to be interesting to see that tie into that, see how that works out. And you guys also, I want to make this very interactive. So if you have thoughts or opinions as well, just throw them up in chat, because they will appear right over here next to me, and we can all see it and chat about it. So with that, I really do think they're going to focus on Ahsoka, and the reason for that is how much we saw her play a very important part in Rebels. And at the end of Rebels, you see her kind of become something more than just a Jedi. And the reason why I think that we'll see her be something more than a Jedi is because of those white crystals. And so we're going to have to talk about that a little bit. Bizzo, hello there. Thank you for that host, sir. Talking some Star Wars here. You'd love to see some Maul backstory at this point. Yeah, I would love to as well. Underdog, there's a lot in the Clone Wars animated series about Maul. But I think they're going to have to bring him in a little bit because... Speed Demon, thanks for the host, man. Because if you watch Solo, I don't want to spoil anything, but there's some very important stuff at the end of Solo. And I think they're going to tie some of that into Clone Wars, maybe build up into it for maybe maybe more of the movies we'll see with maybe a Lando or a Boba Fett, things like that. We're going to see some stuff there. So since we're kind of, at least my thoughts are, we're going to be focusing on Ahsoka a little bit, I wanted to get into a little bit of how Ahsoka got those white lightsabers, the color of lightsabers, what they mean. So we're going to have to get into a little bit of the Jedi and Sith code. We're going to have to talk a little bit about some of the Force abilities and some Force history or Star Wars history here. So the first thing I'm going to start out with is the Jedi code. So let's take a look at that here. So if you look right over here, you can see the codes. You can see them. Hopefully you can see them pretty good on stream. But they're very contrasting, very yin and yang, I guess you could say. And the important aspects that we can take away from this is that the Sith very much are using the Force and bending the Force to their own personal will or their own personal desires. So whatever they want, they bend the will to their, or bend the Force to their will by either passion, anger, rage, whatever they can use. They use those intense emotions to really just pull the Force and do whatever they want, whether it's choke someone, force lightning, whatever. The Jedi are very contrast in that they are more, I guess you could say, agents of the Force. And there's kind of a middle ground in between these two guys, and that's called the Bendu. And the Bendu, we see them, thanks Sky Daddy for that host, man. Sorry, my notifications aren't working right now here. But yeah, so the Bendu, which is, they're basically ones who seek balance in the Force. So kind of getting into Vader, lightsaber lore, crystal lore, because we're, again, we're talking about Ahsoka here, why she has those white lightsabers. And with the Bendu, they neither went too far to the light side or too far to the dark side. And let me kind of explain. They're a lot closer to the original Jedi order, and that's J-E apostrophe D-A-I-I. So not Jedi, but Jedi. It's a little enunciation difference there. Original order, which was basically just some Force-sensitive monks back on a planet called Tathion. And on this planet, you had basically followers of Ashla and followers of Bogan. So Ashla, of course, being the lighter side principles of the Force, Bogan being the more dark side principles of the Force. There came a big battle. I'm not going to get too detailed into that battle, but in this battle, the followers of the Force and these Force monks, these Jedi, learned that to really overcome and overpower their enemies, they had to use more of the dark side aspects of the Force. So eventually that led into a split where you have the more peaceful type monks, which are the Jedi, and then you have the more forceful type, which later on became known as the Sith. So the Ashla and Boga kind of split. And originally what they was going to do is if you were a practicing monk of this, and you were sensitive to the Force, if you got too dark or too light, if you were too light, what they would do is they would send you to the moon and of Bogan, and you would have to meditate on more of the dark side principles of the Force. While if you were too dark, you would have to meditate on more of the light side principles of the Force. And the reason for that is the planet they were on was so sensitive to the Force that if the Force was out of balance, the planet was out of balance and would kill you. So they kind of had to be balanced with the Force. So with kind of all that history, we're going to get into some of the things that the older Jedi could do and some of the things that we seen them do with lightsaber crystals, with lightsabers and whatnot. Because again, we're gonna get into Ahsoka and her white crystals. So one of the really, really cool stories in Star Wars, and we're just gonna throw it up here, is a Jedi named Exar Kun. And he was a very powerful, very gifted Jedi that, like most stories in Star Wars, he eventually fell to the dark side because he wanted more power. And he's one of the first Jedi to build a double-bladed lightsaber, right? His hilt, as you can see in this picture here, he could hold with just one hand, though. So he was extremely hard to fight in lightsaber combat. So one of the things that this older order, because again, this time period of Exar Kun is back in the Old Republic. One of the things that the Jedi could do was force undo blades or objects. And you might notice here, he's blocking a lightsaber with a stick. Like, how the heck do you do that, right? So that's called force undo to blade. So you could take any object, or in most cases, it was a Viro blade or a Durasteel blade in the Old Republic before they had lightsabers. It didn't require any type of power source or anything like that. And they would infuse the Force into this blade, and basically it could cut through anything, block anything like a lightsaber, except for like Durasteel. I think it was the only stipulation it had. And in some cases, because of the Jedi and kind of their alignment or where they were in the Force, it would glow. It would glow like either like a flaming lava red, or it would glow like a white, or it would glow like a yellow or a green or a blue. So if some of you guys know Star Wars, you know there's many different bladed colors of lightsabers. Now, we're not going to get into a lot of the old lore. We're going to borrow a little bit on it because there's, of course, those who are like, I don't know about old lore. Then there's new lore. People are like, I don't like the new lore. I like the old lore. We're going to kind of focus on what is actually true right now. What we know is fact and is indeed lore. So with that said, so they could force undo their blades and didn't require a power source. Well, later on, Jedi end up making lightsabers and whatnot, and they have kyber crystals in the lightsaber. And if you remember in Clone Wars, one of the really, really cool things that Yoda did in one of these shows that we got to see is he took out some younglings to a force cave that had a lot of kyber crystals, and he said, hey, basically you need to be tuned in with the Force. It'll call out to you. You'll have a connection with this particular crystal, and you'll know it's yours. And it was really good, Nate. It was like it actually. I'm leaning on that quite a bit to kind of tell a little bit about this backstory in Ahsoka's white lightsabers here. You got Force Undoing. They can have different colored blades or whatnot depending on their particular alignment, I guess you could say, in the Force. So they go into this cave, and eventually, they get some crystals and whatnot, and they build their lightsabers. Well, one of the things that they do is they focus on that kyber crystal with the Force. And some of the older Jedi do something very similar to what we're seeing here, what Exar Kun's master did, who eventually he eventually did die to Exar Kun because he was just too powerful. I can't remember his name. I think it was like Vodo or something like that. His was actual name. You'd have to Google it. I'm not too sure on that. But one of the things that you could do is what he did here with the staff, which is you can actually take the Force and kind of push a little bit of your own sensitivity of the Force or your own ability or power into that kyber crystal and make your lightsaber stronger. So that's kind of like you can make it into basically what's called a Force weapon, where it would allow you to have a little bit better advantage in lightsaber combat. It'd allow you to be a little more proficient in certain things you can do with your lightsaber. Because it's kind of like its own entity, that kyber crystal. It's sensitive to the Force, and then you have even stronger connection with throwing in and making it a little bit more of a Force weapon. And so you got that connection, you got the Force weapon, and then in doing so, it makes the blade glow a blue or a green. Or you might have some special cases like when you see in episode 1, 2, and 3, you see Mace, and he has a lightsaber color that no one else has had. Now, originally Lucas was just like, yeah, it's just because he wanted a different colored lightsaber or whatnot. But it actually worked out really well in the lore, and that Mace Windu uses a particular fighting style that draws on the light side and the dark side of the Force, and particularly when he's fighting a dark sider, he will use all of their hatred that they're pulling from, or all of their anger, and that fuels him to become even a better fighter and a more powerful fighter. That's one of the reasons he was like number 2 to Yoda, because like no one could match him in a fight. He was a serious bad mofo, That's one of the reasons why. And some people say, Palpatine was holding back, which I think he probably was holding back a little bit. But still, I think he was taking off balance a little bit of how powerful Mace was when he fought Palpatine. So anyways, going back to the lightsaber. I'm just talking here a lot, guys, so feel free to jump in. But what's interesting about that is when... appreciate that follow, ESVA. I'm not sure how you... ESVA, I guess you'd say it. But one of the things that you can do in that is that... I got it. Perfect, man. Awesome. Is that when you use the Force and it changes that color, you can either have it be red or green or blue or whatnot. And so his was purple because it was both light and dark side. Oh, awesome, man. Well, you're in a good place then, because we're talking Star Wars. So, and I'm actually kind of getting into a little bit of lore here, lightsaber lore, because we're talking about Clone Wars, and we're talking about Ahsoka and her white sabers and how she got them. So, with all this being said on how they've kind of, the color of the kyber crystal will change based on the particular person who has it. We're going to get into a little bit of Darth Vader history here. And a little bit, I didn't get the comic books, or I would have brought them up so you guys could see it. But there's a really great line of comics out right now called just Darth Vader. And it's giving a ton of backstory and history between New Hope and when he became Darth Vader. It literally picks up right after he became Darth Vader. And one of the first things that Palpatine did when they executed Order 66 is he had all of the Jedi that were killed and all of their lightsabers. He stole their kyber crystals. Oh, dude. Yeah. I'm only at I think it was 15. So I got a little ways ahead, but I've read some of the other stuff. What's up, man? How's it going, Casual? You guys feel free to jump in with thoughts on this, though. So one of the things he did, he took all of the lightsabers and incinerated them, okay? So Vader, he doesn't have a lightsaber because if you remember, Obi-Wan was, I got the high ground, Anakin, it's over, Took his lightsaber with him. And he has no saber. He's just this menacing machine man full of rage and hate and anger. And so Palpatine sends him out on this mission because there's still a few Jedi remaining. He sends him out on this mission to find this one Jedi that kind of self-exiled himself because he felt some of the ways of the Jedi were slipping. They weren't necessarily being true to their order. And he basically spent all those years in exile training and focusing to become just a BA Jedi, just one that's built for combat, basically. So Vader goes to fight him without a saber, of course, ends up fighting him through a pretty vicious battle. At one point, Vader was thrown off of a cliff into a canyon, and the Jedi was like, oh, he's good as dead. But he used his rage and anger and really started learning how to fuel the dark side power through him to just will himself to do things that normal Jedi or Sith couldn't do, and just become just a freaking tank, man. And he faces this Jedi, starts fighting him and eroding his will, as Vader typically does in fights, and starts using civilians to really throw him off balance by hurting them and force choking them and throwing them off cliffs. Like crazy stuff, right? And he eventually kills this Jedi. He throws him off the cliff. He's Dunsky. Takes his saber, kind of uses his hilt, and takes his crystal, his kyber crystal, and goes to Palpatine. And Palpatine tells him this very important thing. He says, the kyber crystals that the Jedi use are just the same ones as the Sith. Because the old lore was, the Sith, the reason why they're red is because they use synthetic crystals, right? So, yes, exactly, bro. That is exactly right. So that's kind of been thrown out now. That's not really the true lore now. The lore is kind of this, in which we're going to focus on, which is called bleeding. And so what Palpatine told him to do is he needs to take that crystal and he needs to focus all of his rage, his anger, his resentment, everything of the dark side that he has in him into this crystal. So what's interesting about this, as we talked about earlier, was kind of making objects that are force weapons or force enduing, like a stick, as we saw here earlier when Exar Kun was fighting his master and the stick was blocking a lightsaber. One of the things that we learned there is that, when Vader was doing that, he was also using and making that crystal stronger so that when he fought, he would be a even more vicious saber fighter, because once he got his suit, he couldn't put his arms all the way above his head. He could lift them to about right here because of his armor that he had over the top of himself. So he had to develop certain fighting styles, and he also used that crystal, and force enduing in that crystal to make his saber combat even stronger. Because a lot of times when you watch Vader fight in the comics, or you watch him even in New Hope, or, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, his strikes are just powerfully vicious. Like, that's how he overcame Dooku and beat Dooku in Episode 3. He switched to a form that was very aggressive and very powerful strokes to overcome the dueling of Count Dooku. Dooku, I mean, you couldn't outduel him. His dueling style was amazing. He was just a great duelist with the lightsaber. But when you use powerful strokes and things like that, you can really overcome a lot of people's forms and styles. So Vader takes this crystal, kind of circling it here now. He takes this crystal and he makes this crystal bleed and it turns red. So that's basically how he got his, exactly that is. That's how he got a red crystal. Eventually he ends up building his own lightsaber that we see in New Hope and whatnot. But that's how Vader got a red crystal. Is you actually make all night long. Family friendly, exactly, Thaddeus. Look at it there. Look at it there, bro. So yeah, that's how Vader got his to be red. And so it's just really cool for me, at least, to think of how pulling from all that old lore of Force Undoing and things like that, how he got those crystals. We get those crystals that are green or that are blue or that are red, because the Jedi he took it from was a green crystal, but he used it to turn red. They found out the Rogue One catalysts. Yeah, exactly. Because when you looked at Rogue One, for example, and they're like, they could tell that they had a kyber crystal around Urso's neck. They're like, hey, there's some kind of connection there. And as you can see now, I'm going to pull up Ahsoka. You can see her in Clone Wars with her, double-bladed lightsaber and the colors they are. And then you can see her in Star Wars Rebels, where they're actually white. So how did Ahsoka end up getting some white lightsabers? And this is what's interesting, is she apparently kills one of the Night Sisters from the Inquisitors that Vader is over. And to give, I can actually jump into, if you guys just tell me in chat if you want to know, there's a really cool story in one of the comic book issues about the Inquisition and the Inquisitors and Vader and the clones, which we are kind of talking about clones tonight as well. So I can kind of dive into that if you guys would like. But anyway, so she ends up killing, I believe it was like the fifth sister from the Inquisitors. And all the Inquisitors have double-bladed lightsabers. They have the circular thing there that can twirl because it kind of helps offset maybe not some of their greatest fighting abilities. Oh, yeah. Dude, it is very cool, right? I think I'm going to have to go back and tell that, because it kind of winds into this a little bit. So let me back up a little here. So the Inquisitors are basically fallen Jedi that Palpatine has corrupted that are now under the command of Darth Vader. And in one of the comics, I can't remember the name of the planet now. So Esva, if you know, just type it in chat, man. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But it's basically the Waterworld planet that we see in Clone Wars, where they go and fight. I'm trying to remember it, man. I can't remember it. But it's the guy, remember when it's a trap? It's his planet. It's his planet. So Commander Akbar, it's his planet, and it's like a water planet, and they have like very valuable resources, a lot of trade, and so the Empire is there trying to basically get their trade routes, while the rebels are trying to get it as well. They're more on the side of the rebels right now. So anyways, Vader takes, and this is kind of cool because this kind of tells us what happens to some of the clones and why in Rebels we only see like Rex and Wolf in Rebels, and we don't see all these other clones. Most of them got retired, but we learn in the comic here is that Vader actually had a special squad of the remaining clone troopers dressed all in black stormtrooper armor with a red tattoo right over their eye on the helmet and on their face. Thank you. There it is. So that's the actual home world of Akbar. It's kind of like a water planet. And there was a Jedi on this planet that Vader was in charge of going and killing, because he's kind of ferreting out and rooting out all the remaining Jedi. So he takes these clones, he takes all the Inquisitors with him, and they go and end up finding this Jedi and start fighting this Jedi. And the Jedi is smart enough to know that these clones still have the inhibitor chip in their head that makes them fight Jedi if someone tells them to execute Order 66. Well, since the Inquisitors are basically Jedi still, or kind of fallen Jedi, that still registers for them to be Jedi. So the Jedi that Vader's trying to kill says, execute Order 66. All the clone troopers turn on Vader and all the other Inquisitors, and there's this brawl, man, just gnarly brawl that basically all the clones get wiped out. All the Inquisitors, except for a few, get wiped out. Vader is kind of the only one left standing. It's intense, man. But if you haven't read that comic, go read it, because it's so freaking good. It's so good. So anyway, so kind of rounding back over to the crystal. So Ahsoka actually kills the fifth sister and the Inquisitors, and they have the double-bladed lightsaber, and so she takes the two kyber crystals out of it, and she uses the Force, and she heals them. But when she heals them, they don't turn green, they don't turn blue, because it's like we saw earlier right here. We see that her crystals or her kyber crystals are green, but in Rebels they're white. So, and Dave Filoni has actually come out and specifically said that the reason for them being white is because it's really a representation of her neither being a Jedi or a Sith. So what's really, really interesting here is, okay, well, Ahsoka's not Jedi or Sith. We saw what happens at the end of Rebels when Ezra kind of goes into the unknown regions. And, you know, you kind of see her at the end when she walks up and she's like clad in white. And it kind of makes me think if she's going to be kind of like the Bendu, if she's going to be seeking balance. And if that's kind of, we're going to get the kind of start of that in Clone Wars. I'm hoping that's something they show in the new series. Dude, exactly. I'm hoping that we start to see kind of Ahsoka seeing the follies of the Order, because that's kind of what Luke talked about in The Last Jedi, kind of the follies of the Order, and how, no, it'd be better if they were doing it this way or that way or whatnot. There's a really great deleted scene in there, if you haven't seen it, where he kind of messes with Rey in The Last Jedi, which I totally recommend you guys go and watch. If you have it on Blu-ray or whatnot, or like Vudu or something like that, a streaming platform. But that's how she got the white lightsabers. I really think they're going to focus in on her and kind of the dealings with Death Watch, Maul, showing us the relationship between her and Anakin, because it was such a big deal in Rebels. Like in Rebels, when she found out, oh, Darth Vader is Anakin, like, oh, like that was a big deal to her. That was her old master. And so really, really curious to see what's going to happen with that. Really curious to see where it's going to go. But that's my basic thoughts for tonight, guys. I know I've talked a crap ton. I talked a crap ton. But I can't help it. I love this stuff. So it's really interesting to me, the concept of Force bleeding, Force weapons, Ahsoka's being white. And they're kind of bringing that lore back in, like from KOTOR, the game KOTOR, where you could be a Jedi Guardian, you could be a Jedi Sentinel, you could be a Jedi Consular, and those particular affiliations of how you're affiliated with the Force affect your kyber crystal's light color. And I kind of like that. I like that variety rather than just, no, it's just a crystal you get and it makes a green or blue color. Like it's just a little more cool. I don't know. So that's about all I got for the actual web show, guys. If you have any thoughts on any of this, hey man, anytime, man. I'm gonna try to do at least a Star Wars game or some type of lore or history on Star Wars on Sundays. I don't know how often I'll get to do it, but I got this cool setup I mean, check it out. We're in the Falcon. We're chilling, hanging out, talking Star Wars. Yeah, I feel like I don't need to watch the movies now. Daisy. Hey, so Daisy, I know. See, I have this set up to where eventually I can have a co-pilot here with me for specials and whatnot. Have some people jump in, but this will only enhance the movies. This is true. And you can ask my wife. Like a couple of weeks ago, our boys were watching New Hope, and I was just quoting the lines before they started, and she looked at me and was like, "Can you just stop?" I'm just a big, huge Star Wars nerd. I can't help it. But that, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, I don't know if any of y'all have actually seen that where, Force doing a stick to fight a freaking lightsaber. Like, that's incredible, right? Like, man, you are a nerd. Oh, Sky Daddy, that's awesome, man. Yeah. And it's really interesting to see how now they're bringing back, like, your particular affiliation affects the color of the lightsaber. And I'm really glad they're bringing that back in because lightsaber lore is just really cool. Like that's something that I've always enjoyed. That's something I've always thought was really fun. Yeah, he was, but XR Kun was pretty much the baddest of bads out there at this time anyways. And I mean, that's why, I mean, when you look at the saber that he used, like, look at that right there. It's right there. The perfect picture, double hilted with one handle. Like, how do you don't know how to fight that? Like, there's no way to combat that. You don't know how to fight it. Yeah. And a lot of it's being made lore because of the game Galaxy of Heroes, as Nate said. So it's really, really good to get all this lore in there and whatnot. So you guys tell me, we can either wrap up the web show and play a little Star Wars, or excuse me, we can just wrap up the show, or we can play a little Star Wars. I got quite a few Star Wars video games. So you tell me in chat, would you rather just wrap this up, or do y'all want to see some Star Wars now? Because I can throw some Star Wars in here.